Well, good afternoon, everybody. Great to see you. Thanks so much for joining this latest webinar all about all things behaviour change. So it's great to see so many of you. I'll do a quick intro whilst people are joining. People, if you're like me, you've probably grabbed a very quick coffee in between calls and you're joining this call today, which Dominic's organised. So great to see some familiar faces and also some new ones. So welcome all. So today we're talking top tips for running award-winning behaviour change campaigns. So I guess all four of us on the webinar today have got various levels of experience in this. But I'm really pleased Dominic's asked me to chair the session, so that's nice. So I'm going to be chairing. So I'm Darren Caveney, so I'm the owner and creator of Comms 2.0. And I run something called the Unawards, which everybody on the call actually supports and backs, which is great. And they launched back in 2014, so they've been running for a long time now. So other than COVID, it would be kind of every year for 10 years. And each year, obviously, behaviour change becomes more and more important within our campaigns. And, I was on a webinar yesterday, we were talking about data, and I think there's like a Venn diagram, isn't there, of data and behaviour change, and brilliant campaigns are in the middle of that. So I think yesterday's and today's webinars really dovetail nicely. So the Unawards, what we've decided this year, Dominic's very kindly suggested and supported a brand new category. So this year, and they'll launch in September this year, we'll have a brand new behaviour change category called Best Behaviour Change Award. So keeping it simple, just what it says on the tin, and really excited about that. And as I say, many of the campaigns that we've judged and we've looked at previously in previous years, from submissions from some of the people on this call actually, have had all sorts of elements of behaviour change in there already. But I think, really excited that we've got this brand new category for this year, and hopefully some of you on the call today will be inspired, already have great examples that you can share in the chat, and let's get them entered into the Unawards. So they will launch in September. It's free to enter, very simple to enter. They generally close at the end of October, and obviously everybody enters the day before and on the deadline day as well. But you will have 2 months to enter your best behaviour change work. So we're really excited about that and looking forward to really learn about all the stuff that you're doing on behaviour change within your comms and PR. So we've got lots to get through today. We've got three, well, I'd say a glittering array of stars, haven't we, today, in terms of our speakers. We've got obviously Dominic Ridley-Moy, who owns the Behaviour Change Network, and many of you will be aware of him and his great work. I think Dominic's really led the field in the public sector in this space, and I've certainly learned things from Dominic and his work and his webinars and his email that comes out regularly. So really looking forward to hearing from Dominic. Then we have John Paul Danon, who's a sales director at Cam Digital, and I'm really liking John Paul's jumper. I'm re-watching The Killing at the moment. Remember The Killing, the Scandi Noir? It's brilliant, and you'd fit in a treat, John Paul. So I'm genuinely really liking the jumper. So John Paul's got a lot of experience, and he's going to run through some campaign examples and some case studies about delivering behaviour change at scale, but also without having enormous budgets, because most of you on this call will not have big budgets, and that's really important for us. And then we have Lindsay Coulson. Lindsay, we've all known a long time, and many of you will know Lindsay and her work. So Lindsay has won many awards herself. She's an awards judge. So Lindsay's going to talk to us about her top tips and lessons and examples for actually writing award-winning entries, because I think many times you've all done brilliant work, but A, you have to enter, and B, you need to enter well and effectively. So it's going to be really interesting to hear from Lindsay. So we've got about 10 minutes from each of our speakers today. What we're proposing we do is we do questions at the end. So we've got 30 minutes of listening to Dominic, John Paul and Lindsay, and then we'll dive into questions. So if you could, in the chat area, if you could be putting your thoughts, your questions, your ideas, and actually some of your lessons, because we know you do good work as well already in this area. So please do put your questions into the chat, and Dominic and I will work our way through and get as many of those questions answered by our panel. So I'll shut up and I'll hand straight over now to Dominic.
Thank you, Darren, and equally I'd echo what you were saying about John Paul's jumper. I do very much like your jumper, and reminds me of the Rob Mayhew sketches on LinkedIn as well, if anyone follows Rob Mayhew. So There's lots of people on the call who I know come regularly to these sessions, so thank you for continuing to support them. So if you don't know me, my name's Dominic Ridley-Moy, and I run the Behaviour Change Network, as Darren said, and my work is all about kind of helping people use behavioural insights. So just a few housekeeping points about today. So if you're a member of CIPR, CPD points will be available. The recording will be logged onto the website, so do log those points. The deadline is coming up soon. We are recording this session, and the slides will be sent around from all of the speakers. And as Darren said, do ask questions in the chat as we go along. So what I'm going to do today is basically just share a few kind of top tips to run behaviour change campaigns. So it's 8 tips that I've kind of picked up over the years from the work that I do, mainly in the public sector. And it's kind of really sort of working with comms teams, running behaviour change training, all that kind of thing. Really thinking through how can you run campaigns or interventions, so it could be large things or it could be small things that have a real impact. So kind of 8 tips and insights that I've picked up over the years. So tip number 1, and for me this is the most important thing to focus on, and also I would say that this is much more important than solution. Working out with your campaign, what is the problem you're trying to solve? What is the specific behaviour or behaviours you're trying to shift? And I think this is where sometimes this can get skipped over, but actually for me it's really the most important thing, and where you should spend the most time before jumping onto the tactics. And I've been guilty of this in the past, going straight to the tactics, but actually it's been really clear, what are you trying to solve? So I've got 3 examples to explain that in a bit more detail. So if we talk about stopping smoking, for example, in a stop smoking campaign, when we're running a campaign and putting together a campaign as a comms professional, it's almost never about giving up smoking. The campaign will often be about getting people to ring up the stop smoking helpline. So that's a very different behaviour from what stop smoking advisors then do, because they'll use something like cognitive behavioural therapy or something like that, which is very intensive. It's kind of one-to-one support. But actually with your comms campaign, you're just getting people to ring up that stop smoking line or getting in touch by email. So it's that kind of one specific behaviour. And just on a side note about stop smoking campaigns, that scare tactics don't really work. What you tend to find is you just end up with scared smokers if you use scare tactics, and a lot of it is that kind of one-to-one intervention to help you to stop smoking. So that's one example. Example number 2 is I've been doing a lot of work, intensive work in a South London borough to help them with things like recycling, littering, all that kind of things. One of the early things I did in this project is to walk around one of their estates. So there were clearly lots of issues around contamination, overflowing bins, missed collections, not enough recycling bins, lots of things going on. But one thing stood out over everything else, which was that there were too many black bags in the recycling bin. So the early communications and interventions were focused on that one behaviour. And I think that's reinforces the point about be clear about what it is you're trying to achieve. And if we hadn't done that walkabout, we wouldn't have come to that conclusion. I will say that with these kinds of problems, there's lots of issues, but actually thinking about what that one thing is you can focus on is really helpful. So if we take something like, got another public health example, like chronic kidney disease. So I've recently done some work here, and we had a bit of a discussion from the outset about what is it that we want to do. So did we want to raise awareness of what chronic kidney disease is? So posters, leaflets, social media, case studies, all that kind of thing is the usual sort of thing we would do. And that's fine to raise awareness of the issues. But if we wanted to change behaviours, thinking about the specific behaviour we want to change and at what point is really key. So actually you find that when someone gets diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, getting a kidney function test is really important. And I think you get them regularly as well. So actually thinking about the comms at that point could be the most important thing to focus on. So what goes out from the GP? What prompts does a GP have to remind people to get a kidney function test? What does that comms look like? And often that's the bit that kind of gets forgotten. So it's often thinking about the outside the box, and often that could be cheaper than doing all the other things as well. So thinking about things tangentially, like what prompts do you give people in the call centre? What scripts do you give to frontline staff? What prompts do you put on an online form? Where are people when they're making a decision? So tip number 2, and I'll send this round after the webinar, is basically an exercise I like to do with teams, and it's just thinking through 6 kind of simple questions to work out what is the problem you're trying to solve. What are the barriers? Why aren't people doing what we want them to do? So it gets you thinking in detail about what is the actual problem we're trying to solve. So why aren't people doing the right thing with their recycling? How are they doing it at the moment? What are the barriers that stop them doing that? And spending a lot of time on that, and then all the other things that we do already, kind of thinking about audiences, advocates, but also the thing we don't do as much, when and where. Where are you? And what time of day is it when you put out the recycling? What messages do you see by the fridge? All that kind of thing. So this is another exercise that helps take this to the next level. So thinking about, so here's an example. I think someone came in my workshop and worked through hand hygiene, hygiene in general in hospitals, and thinking about what are the different behaviours there. And actually, when you look at all the things you need to do in terms of hygiene, there's a lot there, and getting that long list together and then thinking what has the biggest impact is a really, really useful exercise. So tip number 4, again, that follows on from that. So be clear on what you want to achieve and think about how you can measure it. So obviously things like surveys, focus groups, online metrics are all really useful, but doing other things like just walking around and observing, so looking at the bins on an estate, talking to people, one-to-one interviews, all those kinds of things are useful to help work out what is the actual problem and what are the barriers. And also think about, some of the time it's not always possible to measure things, but there will always be ways that you can measure stuff if you don't necessarily know how to do that. So if we come back to contamination, I ran a workshop, I think, with a waste team recently, and I think there was issues in terms of measuring contamination on an estate, but actually doing things like before and after photos is the way that you can do that. So there'll always be things that you can do that aren't necessarily hugely expensive. So tip number 5. So I think this is where I probably sometimes disagree with comms teams. And we'll come back to this a bit more in the next 2 slides as well. But my view is that when budgets are tight and we need to drive value as comms professionals, this is really important, and that as comms teams, we need a seat at the top table. And it's certainly a difficult balancing act at the moment, and I think with stretched resources, it's not always going to be possible. But my view is that now more than ever, we need to drive change. We need to be the leaders in our organisations, and we need to demonstrate value. So I don't mean that we should always try to run services, but I don't think we should shy away from saying how we can deliver outcomes and push those conversations, push that change, and talk about how we can use comms and things like behavioural science, where you're blurring the edges between comms and service delivery. So I think we definitely have a role to play in that. And also, so this is the flip side, working out that comms won't solve everything, which I know is a bugbear for many, many comms teams. Because if we go back to the example of bins, comms won't solve everything, because at the end of the day, if the bins smell of overflowing and are full, no poster or comms campaign is going to get people to recycle more if you haven't solved environmental factors. So a lot of the time, the work I do and about I suppose doing kind of really impactful behaviour change campaigns is you need a project plan with the service to tackle those kind of really difficult to move behaviours, or think about something simple you can do to establish a kind of quick win. So when I first started trying out lots of different experiments and nudges and all that kind of thing quite a number of years ago, I started with lots of small things. So if you don't know where to start, I would say just try things like do different variations of a letter, do different variations of a text message. I do loads of work with John Paul, and we test out loads of different videos online, loads of different graphics, loads of different messages. And that's a great way to test things at volume and get that kind of intel on what messages work and don't work. And also doing things like sending one letter out to one street, different letter out to a different street, one intervention on one estate, a different intervention on another estate. These are all things that can be done easily and at low cost. And then my kind of final tip is really just thinking about outcomes again. So it's always about kind of demonstrating value and how we should demonstrate the value of what we do. So whether we're encouraging people to exercise more, improving recycling, or if it's about getting people to switch from cars to other forms of transport, all those kinds of things. It's always about how can we measure this? And this is really important for awards that Lindsay will come on to later. What's the value? And I think now, as we're kind of in a period where we have less and less money, there's huge financial pressure in so many organisations, that demonstrating that value of what we do and how we can help save money, for example, is going to be much, much more important for the comms team than it ever has been. So just two final thoughts. So in terms of a behaviour change campaign that has real impact, my final two thoughts are: try and work out what the problem is first, work out what it is you're trying to solve, and don't necessarily do too much. Think about what are those one or two behaviours I want to start off with, and what is it that I need to focus on, and be very good at those things rather than trying to do too much. So finally, if you do want to get in touch with me, always happy to help, whether it's doing a bespoke comms team workshop or looking at how you can solve challenges, all that kind of thing. Do get in touch, and always happy to talk about all things behaviour change. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and hand back to Darren.
Thank you, Dominic. That's really helpful. And yeah, it's interesting, isn't it, that you can kickstart fairly easily with something like some A/B testing on an email or a leaflet or a bit of social media content. So yeah, really helpful. That. Thank you for kicking us off today. So next up we have John Paul and his jumper. So yeah, many of you on the call will know John Paul has been doing some great work in the area of online ads, programmatic ads, touching upon behaviour change and really getting under the skin of issues that comms teams are dealing with, and how in really cost-effective but smart ways we can answer them and address them. So really looking forward to 10 minutes of John Paul and some top tips from him. Over to you, John Paul.
Thank you, Darren. Yes, for those that don't know me or my jumper, I'm John Paul from CAN, which is the Council Advertising Network, and we help the public sector amplify campaigns, but we do it in a way that's really low cost. And we also help give the public sector money to increase the effectiveness of campaigns. But when you've done work designing a campaign and you've done the research, the insight, you've created an array of messages, it's very common in the public sector for us to underinvest in amplifying that and targeting people and achieving sufficient audience reach and frequency. These are essential in terms of making sure that the people you're trying to change the behavior of are aware of the opportunity when you're looking at the various frameworks, and they're aware that things are easy, attractive, social, and that your message has been delivered to them at the right time. And so we help people, public sector organisations, address this, avoid hiding their light under a bushel, as it were. And things have changed. You know, it used to be that public sector behaviour change campaigns, when we think all those years back, had quite an expensive array of channels to use to reach people. And what that meant was that it was very hard to target, it was very hard to measure, and that value for money, unless you're a large central government organisation that want to speak to everybody, it was very hard to achieve what you needed to do. But that's started to change now. The way we consume media has changed radically. And people now receive information in a much more fragmented way over a large range of channels, but their consumption has gone up. And the wonderful thing about being able to target news, search, social media at people is there's this array of data out there that enables us to target people based on what they're doing online. You can even include things like their credit rating, a whole range of things to create, in essence, programs. That's where the programmatic bit comes from. So, for example, if you've got a recycling challenge in Newcastle, you can say, right, if geo equals Newcastle, so we're not going to speak to people outside, but then their age equals 25 to 64, and they're interested in either food, cooking, or they're looking at parenting related content. Let's put this messages around nappies not going in green bins and food waste being recyclable in front of them. The advantage of that is you don't spend any money targeting people who aren't in the target audience. Another example of using first party or your own data is where you can remarket to your own website. So, for example, if a parent is looking at, or someone is looking at school term dates pages on Redbridge Council site, when they leave, and if they've accepted cookies, we can remarket an MMR vaccine clinic alert to them afterwards. So incredibly targeted, using a mixture of third-party data and your own first-party data. That's where the programming programmatic comes from. But it's like it's sort of designed to improve behaviour change campaigns. It means that now you, with a relatively small budget, can target 90+% of any target audience, but it will cost 80% less than traditional channels due to wastage, but just due to the cost of online advertising being so much less, which means higher frequency, higher reach, and therefore more outcomes. But we can also measure those outcomes much better than we used to be able to. So this is good news for people planning campaigns, any sort of campaign, in fact. The spend by the entire advertising industry has shifted dramatically from TV, radio, and out of home towards search, social, and online news. And so it's not that we're saying only the public sector should do more of this. Everyone is, and you can too. So when you're planning a behaviour change campaign, you first need to make sure, am I reaching most people who are in this target audience, if not all? And there are awareness functions within behaviour change. That's certainly an enabler. I need to be aware of the change that I need to make. And they say that you need to see something about 7 times, at least 7 times, to be aware of it. But in order to achieve behaviour change, you need to tell me 70 times, probably in lots of different ways. So that points towards long, highly targeted, multivariate campaigns in order to change people's behaviour. You also need to put the message in front of me at the right time. I'm not always open to all different kinds of behavioural interventions, and I'll show you some examples of how to do that. I wanted to show some things that help you design better campaigns. Now, search data is fascinating because if you think about behaviour change, there's reaching people as they go about their lives. You consume about 1,500 messages per day. But with search, you're targeting people who are typing in very specific things that could indicate all sorts of things. So in here, I've created a search profile around adult social care demand intent, and we can do that in your location, but I'm just going to use England's data for a moment. And what we can do is look at, for example, searches around assistive technology. So if someone's searching for a walk-in bath, for a stair lift, or even for motability, we can start to intercept those searches and place messages linking them, for example, to a local care directory. We can use this data that's out there to also explain to stakeholders this is what people are thinking about, and also this is what they're not thinking about, which is really useful in terms of starting planning a campaign. There's also the wonderful comms files, which you can go in and type something in like young people, and it will go through the last 3 years worth of Unawards to find every single award entry that features that term. So this is gold. This is work that's been done by your peers in other locations in these areas, and you can just plagiarize, borrow, use. It's one of our superpowers in the public sector. There is also the use of your owned channels. You can install, for example, ad space on your website and use this space to experiment with campaigns, to do multivariate testing at scale in front of certain audiences. I talked earlier on about using the school term dates page to target parents, sorry. So using an ad here, which we did for a South Yorkshire Fire water safety campaign. And then we were able to report back and show, the council website was one of the key channels for that campaign in terms of delivery. So using your own channels to experiment for free, and also to identify audiences in a way that maybe you couldn't on other channels, is something that's really useful and a great way of gaining insight in the first place. I just want to show you quickly some examples of this, or good examples. This was a campaign to target vaccine or encourage vaccine take-up amongst specific communities. We decided to take them on a journey to understand why programmatic was the best way to go. We then put a whole array of different creatives in front of different communities consuming different content. So if you're looking at cricket news in Nottinghamshire, you would have seen this nurse talking about taking her grandma to have the vaccine. I apologise I flipped through this, but this is where it really got good, where we see the red line showing comms activity and the blue line showing jabs in arms. Another example was a campaign that I believe Dominic alluded to earlier, was for Tower Hamlets, where we were trying to target people and understand the level of awareness. I'm trying to get this stop sharing thing to disappear. I don't want to do that, but we can share all this afterwards, as I'm conscious of time, and I think we probably need to move on. But there are lots of good examples, and we can share these with you. And by working in the public sector, you have unique access to. So to sum up, my top tips: absolutely essential to agree some sort of outcome measure or design some kind of user experience that helps you measure outcomes. It can be really simple form, can be the service sharing data with you. Kind of try and avoid moving on these kind of things until you've got that. Start by using programmatic first. It's really cheap and you can experiment really quickly in days and find a lot of stuff out. Make sure you test a lot of messages. You'd be surprised at the things that don't work well and some of the things that do. So your assumptions and your gut instinct are usually very good, but it's worth identifying those outliers. The use of your own channels to experiment with in the first place, that's free, doesn't require budget, you're in a good place. And then make sure you set the campaign up so that the outcomes are measured before, during, and after that campaign. It makes it really easy for decision makers to understand that you've done a great job. Always happy if you get in touch or ask any of us on the call to share examples of similar campaigns. When you're planning, look at comms files. Get in touch with us. We'll show you what's worked well in other places. I'm more than happy to do that kind of search insight for your area. Just drop me a line, and we've got a whole range of different reports that we can share with you around public health and all different things like that. And also at CAN, we're more than happy to create example plans for you, even if you do nothing with us, just to show you what's possible and what the balances might be. That's it from me on this. I hope that was useful.
That was really helpful. Thank you, John Paul. Yeah, I've got lots of questions, but I'll wait for the chat. But I think that offer around kind of the search insight offer is really, really helpful to people, because I think that's one of the problems, isn't it? There'll be people on the call that are just so busy with 50 things on the to-do list, and yeah, everyone knows we need to do some research at the beginning, but time gets squeezed, doesn't it? And it's one of the areas that we don't research enough and we don't evaluate enough at the end, because we're doing the chunk in the middle. And I think that offer is really helpful. So yeah, do take John Paul up on that, and we can share all the contact details afterwards. Thank you, John Paul. So next up, we've got Lindsay Coulson, and yeah, Lindsay is an award-winning communications consultant herself, has judged in awards, has been involved in award events, and essentially knows all sorts about all things awards and how behaviour change can be a really key part of scripting and entering and then hopefully shortlisted and winning awards. So yeah, really looking forward to hearing Lindsay's top tips. So over to you, Lindsay.
Thank you very much, Darren. Yeah, so aside from being a consultant, as you said, I've also been a judge. I've written them in-house. So I really have seen awards from all sides. What I'm going to do today is just run you through 5 top tips and talk around that a little bit, and hopefully give you kind of a good grounding as to what is required to create a really good award entry. Because what is such a shame, and I think we would all say this, you guys do such great work, but sometimes when I'm reading award entries, it's not represented well enough, and it's the ones who are writing it well who are getting their awards nominated. So I would say it's probably about 40% is how it's written and the data that you can add to it. So tip number 1, and I don't want to take you all back to the horrors of school and taking exams, etc., but it really is, the golden rule is to answer the question. So read the criteria, be clear about what they are asking you to do, and make sure that you absolutely cover off everything that they are asking for. And often that criteria and the guidance and the request for information, that helps you to create your award structure for how you need to, what you need to do and when, etc. I had a recent client who the award just didn't fit into the criteria, so we decided it just wasn't worth putting it in. Okay, next slide. Dominic's in charge of my slides today, so okay, so I think this is probably the most important of all of them. Prove your success. It's about setting out really clearly what you want to achieve, and I think Dominic has already touched on this a little bit. So, you know, what was your objective at the beginning, and then be really clear about how you achieved that objective so that you're closing the loop. The best way to do this is always to build in that monitoring and evaluation from the very beginning. Of course, that's not always possible, especially if you're writing an award entry for another part of the council where you don't have control of that. But as we've seen, there are lots of different sets of data within the organisation that you work in, and it's about giving yourself a bit of time to get out there and ask questions and try and find that data so you can prove the success of your award entry. And if you can't, or it's too early perhaps, and that's often the case, I'll often see an award entry where we're maybe trying to write it a year too early, step back and do it a year later. Don't just enter it at that point, because I do think it's probably one of the first things that the judge will look for. And if you can't prove your success, it will get discarded and all that great work that you've done will be wasted. Okay, number 3. Okay, so be kind to the judge. I'm sure all of us who've judged awards will say this is absolutely true. I've got Judge Judy there, but that could easily be Judge Darren. So think of Darren when you're writing your awards. He may have 20 or 30 award entries to read. So surprisingly, because we all think our award entries are really important, people aren't going to spend sort of half an hour reading through your award and working their way through right to the end to get to that kind of really great golden nugget of information. So make sure that it's right up front, and you're making it easy for them. You know, going back to that previous slide, I always put the prove your success bit at the very top, so it's clear, so that when the judge is reading it, they can go, okay, this is worth me reading in more detail. So yeah, I mean, the other things I think to say, be really clear and concise, make it accessible, format it well so it's clear, and kind of tell a story as you go through if you can. I mean, I always like to make sure that I bullet point facts so they're very easy and accessible to read. And don't overwrite it. Obviously keep to the word count. You often will get 10% either way. And make sure you're handing over your information really on a plate. Don't make the judges go looking for it. Okay. Next one. Okay, so this is kind of the nice to have stuff that really makes you stand out from potentially another award, which is very similar and has also proven the success. So if you can do things like add in a nice quote from an advocate, might be a partner that you did the campaign with, it could be the leader of your council, it could be senior officers, just somebody with a bit of clout who's going to add weight to your award entry. The other thing that I think can really work within your word count, if you can make it happen, is to have a really short case study of a resident perhaps. So somebody whose life has been positively impacted by the work that you or the council has done. You know, having something from kind of a real person will give it that edge over another award entry. So really important. Okay, and really, if you're going to be able to do all of the things that I've just talked about previously, then you've got to give yourself lots of time. You know, I would highly recommend not starting the award on deadline day. We've all done it. It does happen, and occasionally it can come off, and you know, you might get nominated, you might win. But I think the fact is, if you're going to request information like finding a case study, getting an advocate quote, getting it signed off, etc., and even more importantly, finding all of that data and pulling it all together, then you are going to have to give yourself plenty of time. And then a final point that I just wanted to make, and I add this now because I was thinking about this in the shower this morning. I think there is another way to do award entries where you are thinking very strategically about it at the beginning of the year. So, and I think this is the gold standard, really. It's almost that kind of conversation with your leader, your chief exec, your senior management team to think, what are the priorities for the organisation for the year? What are the things that we want peers and key stakeholders to know about the organisation? So, for example, you might want the industry to know that you have a great foster care unit because you want to recruit more foster carers. And that might be a priority for that year. So you would take that as an award entry and enter that into as many awards as you could over the course of the year. I find that is also incredibly time efficient because you write it once and then you just have to re-edit it so it fits the criteria of each of the award entries that you go for over the course of the year. So those are my top tips. You know, please do get in touch if you want to have a further conversation about awards, and I'll drop my email into the chat. Thank you.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Lindsay. And yeah, I've jotted a few notes down there myself. Yeah. couple of weeks back, I was judging some NHS awards, and such brilliant work in and amongst all of the entries I was looking at. But a lot of what you've said, it was true. And I think making it easy read for judges, simple signposting, bullet points, that whole kind of less is more. We've all done it. We all feel the need to kind of cram everything in, don't we? But yeah, when you've got, I think Alona in the chat, hi, hope you're good, has said, yeah, I once had over 70 entries for one category for some MJ awards. Some had great content, but I didn't have the time to find it. And it's that, isn't it? It's a lot. It's a big time commitment actually for judges. I realise that each year as I get 25 judges to spend whole weekends judging Unawards entries. So yeah, I owe them all lots of beers. So yeah, some really great tips there. In the chat, we've got lots of good comments and thoughts. Please do get your questions in for the panel. We're really keen to get those questions from you, and also your own examples and your own lessons and where you've been doing good things around all things behaviour change. Let's just go through the chat just really quickly.
Darren, I was just going to say there's a question in the Q&As, so it's a question for John Paul, so I was just going to pick up on that one. So it's from Faye about any tips on how to get around capturing website cookies legally. We have opt-in cookies, but no one selects them, so we can't remarket effectively.
Great question. This will be down to the design of the consent management bit. So if your web team have decided to set it to default to off, that's where your problem will be. It'll also mean that your analytics won't be working. There are many examples in the public sector of the default being accept all. And most people will press that button. So when you've designed the consent capture mechanism to hold everything back, make it like the big green button on the right, accept all, or edit options, but the accept all will be pressed in most instances, and that will enable you to that will mean that your percentage of acceptances will go up. Cookies are becoming tougher over time. There are fewer and fewer browsers supporting them, so they're a dwindling resource, but still very, very powerful.
Really helpful. So, Dominic, question for you that's kind of in the back of my head. We talk about behaviour change a lot. I suppose the reality is for some teams that they're not able to apply good behaviour change practice to every campaign because priorities and demand and so on and so forth. And some teams may be thinking, we haven't really got a good handle on this. And you've given some tips already on this. But if I'm in a busy comms team and I've got a new campaign to begin next week, what would be, where would you go first? Which resources would you look at? Which, really, if I've got half an hour next week to make a start on a genuinely effective behaviour change campaign, where would you go? What would you do first in your 30 minutes?
I mean, 30 minutes, not much. So yeah, I think I'd just have to think about what is the actual problem we're trying to solve, and being clear on that, and get that clear in your head, because sometimes that can mean that actually you do something very different, as I was saying earlier, with the kind of I suppose with the chronic kidney disease example, and it's that kind of actually, rather than doing loads of posters and social media and a massive campaign, let's just look at the letter that goes out with the kind of when you get diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, something like that. So it's just thinking about, I suppose, coming at it a bit differently and just thinking about that. I mean, a lot of the time, I also work a lot with John Paul, so actually it's like, let's just test loads of different things. So I had this one example for a cost of living campaign, and I thought, it'd be good to test lots of different things, but we had the graphics, and that's the graphics that were agreed. We couldn't really do much, so we just tried different variations of descriptors underneath the graphics. So kind of things like general cost of living support, go here. Do you need help with your bills? Go here. Are you struggling with debts? That kind of thing. And just trying to test that out to see if that made much of a difference. And just changing the text made a huge difference. So that's one of the things you can do.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks. Russell has also suggested a very good book on the subject, which is in the chat, which some of you might want to check out on on Amazon, or even, no, don't do that. Go to your local independent bookshop and have a look there, see if they've got it. Or ask a comms pal if they've had it and already read it. Lindsay, I loved your idea about using kind of, a customer's quote or a testimonial. I think that's a really nice idea. It did remind me of a little funny story from 100 years ago when I was in house and we ran a social media campaign. Back in the days when social media was still a happy place to be. And we ran what we thought was a really good campaign. And we had a message back in from a resident who said, probably the best council in the world, which was kind of a play on the strapline from Carlsberg at the time. Clearly we weren't a million miles from being the best in the world, but actually we used that quote as our final line in our awards submission, and I swear that quote got us over the line to win the award. I can never prove that, but it just felt like a really good way to end with. It's not just us saying it. This is a direct quote. It was a tweet. This is a tweet from a resident, a genuine resident tweet. Such things wouldn't happen these days, but I think it's a really great idea to include those testimonials and quotes, and that third party endorsement's really important, isn't it?
Trying to come off mute. Yeah, absolutely. It makes a huge difference. I mean, obviously there's an issue around word count. And for some awards you have to be so super careful because it's a very short count. So I think that comes back to making it as concise as possible, so you do give yourself a little bit of space to have those added extras. But yeah, I do think it can swing it. It can make a big difference. And when you've got a lot of awards where everyone's written them quite well and they're quite similar, and you've got that sort of everybody's been able to largely prove their worth, therefore they've all been nominated, that is the kind of thing that just takes you above and will potentially get that win for you, just like you did, Darren.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. I guess it's standing out from the crowd, which is everything we want to do in comms, isn't it? It's standing out in a cluttered market and working smartly. We've got a question in from Lynn Carstairs from up in Scotland. Hi, Lynn. I'd be keen to know what you see is the best. What you see is best when there is some money to spend. I'm in a Scottish council and often approached by clients with government funding to spend in a financial year. For example, they want more people to leave the car at home. So, encouraging people to leave the car at home, use public transport, to walk, to cycle, etc. So for some of you have a budget. Sometimes it might not be enormous, but you have a budget. I suppose perhaps come to John Paul first. If Lynn came to you and she had, I don't know, £600 to spend, where would you start? What would be your kind of top 3 tips of where to go with that budget?
Well, I would say for £600, you're probably not going to achieve much behaviour change as a start. So definitely manage expectations there.
Yeah.
And I would probably actually start by speaking to Dominic. So getting as much data as you can to a behaviour change expert and getting them to sort of put it through the various filters of the framework so that you can get to a realistic, easy call to action. With getting people, cars are incredibly convenient, especially in rural areas, almost essential. So then positioning the bus or public transport or walking or cycling from the public health, the climate, but also cost, also a whole range of different angles that you can take in front of these audiences, lots of different reasons why it's good to then drive consideration. And I also think around driving, that sort of thing, you need to make it easy for people to work out whether it works for them. So creating a landing page where people can put in their requirements, location, things like that, and then it creates a query to Google Maps or whatever that then tells them that there's a bus that does that. Their kids maybe could do that. Maybe you don't have to spend all your time negotiating with your kids about being parent taxi. Maybe you could empower them to go and use these sort of things. Also, of course, yes, Scottish weather blowing you and slowing you down, I can imagine, is a thing. But in the context of improving your health, in the context of reducing the cost of you spend on petrol, the context of the fact that actually the bus can be a bit more of a social, enjoyable thing on going out for nights out. So I would certainly, get the behaviour change bit nailed. really focus on those outcomes, and then I'd be able to help amplify that in a very targeted way over time to young people, to parents, to a whole range of different audiences for you.
Yeah, that's really
10K is
helpful.
good. 10K is a good start.
Would you do anything different if it was 10K?
Yes, absolutely. Well, if you're given a very, very tiny budget, you've really got to stakeholder manage and say, look, this is going to be a toe in the water. We're going to test some creatives and feed back to you so that you can then see if it's investable. With 10,000, over a period of months, you could definitely get data back from buses on number of tickets sold or number of cards scanned or so on, and you could see that variance, then say, okay, well, look, we've got a cost per behaviour change unit of X. If you want to achieve your policy, the budget needs to be Y, and do it that way.
Yeah, really helpful, and thanks to Chloe in the chat as well from Transport for Greater Manchester, who's literally doing something on this very subject at the moment. So yeah, anything, Dominic, to add to what John Paul's already said on this one?
Yeah, I mean, and this is something that people kind of often. So I'd kind of do a 3-week masterclass, and this is a problem that people often kind of work through with me on that masterclass, and I think for me it's working out what's happening and why, and thinking about what the easiest quick win is. So sometimes it's kind of what's the easiest thing you can shift from doing. So a lot of the time with these kinds of things, it's like if you want people who are doing no exercise to exercise, getting them to do 20 minutes a day is manageable, but obviously getting them to start jogging lots is not manageable. So thinking about what's happening and kind of doing things like working out, well, actually, you know what? And I think the example I'm thinking of with one council, we worked out that if we want to shift people from cars to walking to school, actually, if you pick an area where you do the maths and actually walking is going to be quicker than the car, you've got a kind of behavioural sort of point that you can use and start that campaign. But you just need to sort of work out what the actual problems are, what's stopping people, what those barriers are, and work through it, and then kind of pick different things that will work, because you've got to have a reason. You've got to be able to motivate people and get them to do that kind of thing, basically, if that makes some sense.
No, it does make sense. No, thank you. That's helpful. Lindsay, I guess with your comms consultant's hat on, anything to add if somebody comes to you with a budget around behaviour change campaign? Any top tips from you?
Well, it's nice and slightly unusual to get a budget these days anyway. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in terms of campaigns, it's about making sure you do speak to people like Dominic and JP and getting their input into your campaign. I always think with a behaviour change campaign, it's the emphasis, if you're thinking about Oasis and how you do campaigns, the emphasis is on your audiences. So it's about absolutely getting under the skin of those audiences and knowing exactly who you're talking to. And creating those pen portraits and speaking to those people and having focus groups with those people and test all the way through so that your messages are resonating with those people as well. So that would be kind of the main thing that I would do.
Yeah, no, really helpful. Thank you, Lindsay. John Paul's very politely got his hand up. John Paul.
I was just thinking earlier on, speak to Lindsay, giving yourself time. A great way of giving yourself time, because leaders in all the organisations we work for absolutely love an award. We've just taken the Foster Care Collaboration Award around so many places. They love it. If you make that an objective at the beginning of the campaign, and then you say, this is one of our ambitions with this campaign, it gives you a bit more kind of permission to get data, to get all of these sort of things. It's not just, pushing out of the campaign, we're going to go for an award on this and we're going to be known for this, which means that we need insight data. We need to speak to people. It might up the level a little bit in terms of the energy people are keen to put in. And also as well, not necessarily just for awards, but if you speak to someone like Lindsay in the beginning, they can put you on the right track. And then I've been interviewed by Lindsay for award submissions. She knows what to say. She also knows what not to spend time or waste time on, and how to make something that wins. And I think you've got quite an amazing success rate in terms of winning awards. Everything I've been interviewed about has gone on to win. So I think it's a mindset as well as a trophy. It's a way of stealing the resolve within the organisation that this matters, and it's something worth doing really well.
Yeah, I think that's very wise words. There's a brilliant conversation happening in the chat about all things influencers, and it made me smile a little bit. I do sometimes think that there's a belief from our colleagues internally in teams and services that comms people have these little black books with the phone numbers of lots of celebrities, and I don't know any celebrities. I did see Joe Lycett in the gym last week. That was a claim to fame. But yeah, I don't know any celebrities, and I don't know many comms people that do. But there's a really helpful chat around all things influencers. And yeah, I suppose, Dominic, have you got anything to add on behaviour change and influencers? Any experiences, or John Paul's put in some words of caution in there, as have others in the chat. But any thoughts on influencers within behaviour change?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really about getting people matching it up to what it is you want to achieve. So just get the right person, really, and that can be an influencer, but it could equally be it could be, I always use the example of Karen on an estate in a local WhatsApp group. So I think I was doing this piece of work on this one estate, and I think most of the kind of council channels and stuff like that didn't really work particularly well, but actually just getting Karen to spread stuff on the WhatsApp group, that was the single best thing we did with that campaign, and it was much better than anything else, than all the kind of corporate channels and stuff like that. So I think it's just basic concepts. Get the right person. An influencer can be absolutely amazing, or they can not be. It's just like what resonates with your audience, and what's going to get them to do the thing you want them to do.
Yeah, really wise words. And funny enough, in the chat, Mr. Paul Masterman, hi to Paul, he's just said the right influencer can be someone's mum.
Exactly.
So yeah, I'm mindful of time because we're coming very close to our close time of 1 o'clock, and if people haven't eaten, they need to go off and grab sandwiches before they jump on their next Teams meeting. We've got to think about that mental health and well-being, so quick screen break for 20 minutes and a quick sandwich. But yeah, so just wanted to thank everybody who's joined the call. We had well over 100 at one point, so really great to see so many people give up an hour of their Friday. Thank you for doing that. The slides will come out, everybody's contact details, but yeah, just a thanks first to Lindsay. Thanks for everything that you've shared. Lindsay, where can people find you online if they need to find you?
I put my email address in the chat.
Perfect.
I'm in the process of setting up an awards company at the moment, so more to come on that. So
yes, yeah. We must chat about that then. So yeah, thank you ever so much for sharing your experiences today, Lindsay. John Paul, I think you've probably shared details, but yeah, just want to give us a quick reminder of your web address so people can find you.
It's in the chat, my email address, if you want the search or anything like that. Thank you very much for having me along.
And I'll send everything round. So I'll send around the slides, send around the recording, post it on LinkedIn as well. So I'll make sure you've got everyone's contact details. And yeah, do remember, log it for CIPR CPD points if you remember. And thank you very much to Darren for hosting today. And also do start thinking about your unaward entries now, so you don't leave it to the last minute. We're very much looking forward to seeing all your entries later on this year.
Yeah, although can I just say very quickly, the brilliant Rob McCleary at Gedling Borough Council did admit they won best small team in 2022, and he did admit to saying, yeah, he spent 40 minutes on it on the last day just before the deadline. So, but that's not the way to do it. That's a one-off. We want it done the proper way, don't we? So brilliant. Thanks everyone. Go and get some lunch. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you all again soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye everyone.
Bye.